My wife Eleanor always said Thanksgiving wasn't about the turkey, it was about the sound of a full house, the clatter of plates and the rise and fall of family arguments. Now, the only sound was the low hiss of my truck's tires on the frozen asphalt, a lonely sound that echoed the hollowness in my chest. Eleanor was gone, and the house she'd made a home was just a collection of quiet rooms. The silence had become so loud, so suffocating, that it had finally pushed me out the door and onto this dark highway. Why does a memory, something meant to bring comfort, sometimes feel like a stone in your gut? Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. My daughter Amelia had made her wishes clear a week ago, her voice tight and cool over the phone. "We just need some space this year, Dad. It's our first Thanksgiving with Mark's parents. It's complicated." Complicated. That was the word she used to erase 30 years of tradition, 30 years of me carving the turkey at the head of the table. I told her I understood, but the lie tasted like ash in my mouth. For a week I wrestled with her words, but the image of my grandson, Leo, his bright 8-year-old face kept pushing back. He wouldn't understand complicated. He would just see an empty chair where his grandpa was supposed to be. So here I was, a trespasser driving toward his own family, the gift I'd bought for Leo cold on the passenger seat beside me. The truck's heater was blasting, but a different kind of chill had settled deep in my bones, a cold that came from the inside out. What would you do if your own child told you to stay away on a day like this? I killed the engine a block away from their house, the sudden silence making my ears ring. Amelia and her new husband had bought a place in one of those new developments where every house looked identical, perfect rows of beige siding and pristine lawns. Theirs was the one blazing with light, a picture postcard of holiday warmth against the deep, frigid blue of the twilight. I could see silhouettes moving behind the big bay window. Laughter, wine glasses raised in a toast, the easy comfort of a family that felt complete without me. The sight should have hurt, and it did, but a strange, calm dread was washing over me, cold and slow. I just needed to see him. Maybe I'd just leave the gift on the porch. A silent message that his grandpa hadn't forgotten him. I got out of the truck, the 15-degree air hitting my lungs like a punch. The wind was sharp, carrying the faint, savory scent of roasting turkey and stuffing from the house. A smell that had always meant home, but now felt like a locked door. As I walked, my boots crunching on the frost-hardened grass, my eyes scanned the manicured lawn, the perfectly hung wreath on the door. And then I saw it. A shape, small and huddled by the curb next to the mailbox. It was so still I almost mistook it for a discarded pile of laundry or a piece of lawn furniture left out by mistake. But it wasn't. It was a child. My heart seized. I moved closer, a terrible, icy certainty creeping up my spine. It was Leo. He was sitting on the frozen curb in just a thin t-shirt and shorts, his bare legs tucked up to his chest. His arms were wrapped around himself, his small body trembling in a violent, uncontrollable shiver. His skin was a pale, mottled blue under the harsh glare of the streetlight, his lips drained of all color. He wasn't crying. He was just staring at the warm, glowing house, his face a blank mask of misery. I felt the world tilt on its axis. The sounds of the party inside, the music, the laughter, seemed to mock the silent, shivering boy outside. I knelt in front of him, my own breath catching in my throat. "Leo?" His head lifted slowly, and his eyes, when they met mine, were dull and empty. There was no spark of recognition, no surprise, just a vast, hollow ache that swallowed me whole. I reached out to touch his arm, and it was like touching a block of ice. As I pulled him to his feet to wrap him in my own thick coat, my hand brushed against his shorts pocket. I felt a small, crumpled piece of paper inside. My fingers, numb from both the cold and the shock, fumbled to pull it out. Under the stark light, I unfolded it. It was a child's drawing of a turkey with a big red X through it. and scrawled beneath in shaky block letters were 6 words that stopped my heart cold. Eleanor used to say that a child's hands were the most honest things in the world. She'd watch Leo back when he was a toddler, his chubby fingers tracing the patterns on a tablecloth or closing tightly around my thumb. She said you could see a whole story in them. A memory of her surfaced so sharp and clear it felt like she was sitting right beside me in the truck. It was Leo's first Thanksgiving at the big table, and Eleanor was patiently showing him how to fold a napkin, her gentle hands guiding his clumsy ones. The warmth of that memory was a stark, cruel contrast to the piece of paper I now held in my own trembling fingers. The note wasn't a napkin, and the story it told was a nightmare. What happens when the hands that are meant to protect a child are the ones that leave them out in the cold? I carried Leo back to my truck, his small body feeling unnervingly light, like a bird with hollow bones. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He just let himself be lifted, his head lolling against my shoulder. I got him into the passenger seat and blasted the heat, the vents roaring to life in the oppressive silence. I stripped off my coat and wrapped it tightly around him, then took off my gloves and began rubbing his hands, trying to force life back into the frozen, pale flesh. His skin was waxy, unresponsive. His teeth chattered a frantic, silent rhythm against his jaw. I kept my eyes on him, watching for any flicker of the boy I knew, but he was gone. In his place was a stranger, a ghost with my grandson's face. I finally looked down at the crumpled note again, smoothing it out on the dashboard. I will not eat the turkey. 6 simple words in a child's unsteady scrawl. It wasn't defiant. Looking at it, I knew my grandson. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a declaration. This was a line he had drawn for a reason he couldn't or wouldn't explain. A cold, heavy certainty settled in my gut, displacing the initial shock. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was punishment. My daughter, my Amelia, she knew how much Leo loved Thanksgiving. He loved the mashed potatoes, the weird gelatin salad Eleanor used to make, the ritual of it all. He wasn't a picky eater, not in a way that would ever warrant this cruelty. My gaze shifted back to the house, to the warm, inviting glow of the dining room window. I could see them all so clearly now. Mark, my daughter's husband of 2 years, was at the head of the table, my old spot, carving the turkey with a flourish. His parents were seated on one side, laughing at something he'd said. And there was Amelia, my daughter, raising her glass, a perfect smile on her face. Her back was to the window. Her back was to her son. Do you think a mother could really be blind to this? Or was she just choosing not to see? A memory, ugly and dark, pushed its way forward. Last summer, at a barbecue, Leo had accidentally spilled a soda on Mark's new white sneakers. I saw the flash of fury in Mark's eyes, a darkness that was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a tight plastic smile. He had gripped Leo's shoulder, his knuckles white, and said, "We need to learn about consequences, don't we, champ?" Amelia had just laughed it off, saying Mark was just being a good stepdad. But I felt the chill of it then, and I felt it now. This was a consequence. This was Mark's lesson. My grief for Eleanor, my hurt at being excluded, it all burned away, leaving behind a hard, clear core of rage. I wasn't a guest anymore. I wasn't a father hoping for an invitation. I was a protector. I checked on Leo one last time. A little color was returning to his cheeks, but his eyes were still closed, his breathing shallow. I pulled the coat tighter around him and locked the truck. Every step toward that house was deliberate. The crunch of my boots on the frozen ground was the only sound in my world, a rhythmic beat counting down to a reckoning. The laughter from inside grew louder, clearer. I could hear Mark's booming voice, the delicate chime of his mother's laugh. The sound of their happiness was a physical thing, a wall I had to push through. I reached the front porch, its cheerful welcome mat a bitter irony. Through the decorative glass of the front door, I saw the scene in perfect, sickening detail. They were a family, whole and content. Mark leaned over and kissed Amelia's cheek, and in that moment, I knew I wouldn't be knocking. I balled my hand into a fist, feeling the joints crack in the cold, and drew my leg back. But just as I braced my body to shatter that perfect picture, the porch light flickered on, blinding me for a second. The doorknob twisted from the inside. The door swung open and Mark's mother stood there, a plate of scraps in her hand. Her polite socialite smile froze on her face as she saw me. Her eyes widened, a flicker of confusion turning to alarm. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Grief has a sound. For the last year, it had been the oppressive silence in Eleanor's half of the closet, the absence of her humming in the kitchen. But standing on that porch, staring into the face of my son-in-law's mother, I heard a new kind of grief. The sound of a future shattering. It was the sharp intake of her breath, a tiny whistling gasp that was drowned out by the manufactured joy spilling from the dining room. Her eyes, wide and startled, weren't just seeing a stranger. They were seeing a problem, an unwelcome variable in her perfectly calculated evening. She was holding a plate of turkey scraps, meant for a dog they didn't even own. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. My grandson was freezing to death on the curb and she was about to throw a feast to the frost. What does a person's face look like in the moment before their world cracks open? I saw it on hers. The polite smile faltered, her painted lips twitching. She clutched the plate tighter as if it were a shield. "Can I help you?" she finally managed, her voice a thin, brittle thing. The warmth from the house washed over me, carrying the rich scent of gravy and rosemary, a smell that now turned my stomach. Behind her, I saw Mark glance toward the door, his brow furrowed with annoyance at the interruption. His eyes met mine over his mother's shoulder. There was no surprise in his gaze, no confusion. Just a flash of cold, hard recognition, followed by a flicker of pure, unadulterated fury. He knew. He knew Leo was out here. And he knew I was the one person who would not let it stand. The silence on the porch stretched for a heartbeat, a tense, humming wire. I didn't answer his mother. I didn't need to. My answer was for him. I just held his gaze, letting the cold fury I felt travel across the space between us. I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. He placed his wine glass down on the table with a sharp click, the sound cutting through the low murmur of conversation. He was getting up. His mother, sensing the shift, took an involuntary step back, bumping into the doorframe. "Mark, dear, there's a man here," she started, her voice trembling slightly. But I wasn't a man. In that moment, I was something more primal. I was a grandfather. I was the keeper of promises I had made to my wife and to the small boy now huddled in my truck. I took a deliberate step forward, crossing the threshold without an invitation. The woman scurried out of my way like a frightened mouse. The warmth of the house was a physical shock, the sudden change in temperature making my skin prickle. The cozy scene I had witnessed from the outside now looked grotesque. The gleaming silverware, the perfectly browned turkey, the crystal glasses filled with red wine. It all looked like props on a stage set for a horror play. The other conversations died one by one as I walked toward the dining room, my wet, dirty boots leaving dark prints on the polished hardwood floor. Mark's father, a soft-looking man with a neatly trimmed mustache, lowered his fork, his eyes wide with alarm. But it was Amelia, my daughter, whose reaction broke what was left of my heart. She stood up, her hand flying to her throat, a napkin falling from her lap. Her face, which had been glowing with a happy flush from the wine and the warmth, turned a sickly, ashen white. "Dad?" she whispered, the word barely audible. Her eyes darted from my face to the open door, then back again. A dawning horror crept into her expression. She knew. In her soul, she knew why I was there. Did you ever have a moment where you look at someone you've loved your whole life and realize you don't know them at all? That's what I felt looking at my own child. I stopped at the edge of the dining room, the festive table separating me from them. Mark stood opposite me, his hands now balled into fists at his sides. He was taller than me, broader, younger. He radiated a coiled, aggressive energy. He was a man used to getting his way, a man who saw consequences as tools for control. "You weren't invited," he said, his voice low and menacing. Each word was a carefully placed stone, meant to build a wall between me and his perfect family. I ignored him. My focus was on Amelia. I held her gaze, my own eyes burning. I wanted her to feel the weight of my presence, the weight of her failure. I let the silence hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Let them feel the cold I had just come from. Let them wonder. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the crumpled piece of paper I had taken from Leo's shorts. The texture of it, the childish folds, grounded me. This was real. This was happening. I pulled it out slowly, deliberately, and held it up for them to see. I didn't have to smooth it out. They could all see the crude drawing of the turkey, the angry red X slashed through it. They could all see the shaky letters. Mark's face hardened into a mask of stone. Amelia's eyes filled with tears, her bottom lip trembling. She took a half step toward me. "Dad, please. Let's not do this here." "Here?" I finally spoke, and my voice was a stranger's, a gravelly, raw sound I didn't recognize. "Where is here, Amelia? In this warm house? At this full table?" I took another step, my hand still holding the note out like an offering or an accusation. I let my eyes drift over each of them, the stunned in-laws, the furious husband, the crumbling daughter. Then I let the note fall from my fingers. It fluttered to the pristine floor, a tiny white flag of surrender from a boy they had abandoned. I looked directly at Amelia, and I said the 6 words that had been burning in my throat since I saw my grandson shivering on that curb. "Your son is outside and freezing to death." The words left my mouth and hung in the warm, festive air like shards of glass. There was no rage in my voice, no shouting, just a dead level calm that was far more terrifying. The silence that followed was absolute. The soft Christmas music playing from a speaker in the corner suddenly sounded obscene. The ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway became a slow, deliberate countdown. I watched their faces, a gallery of shock and disbelief. Mark's father dropped his fork, the clatter against his plate unnaturally loud. His wife's hand, still clutching the plate of scraps, flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning, second-hand shame. But my focus was locked on Amelia and Mark. Their faces went white, not just pale, but a bleached, bloodless shade of white, the color of bone. It was the color of guilt. It was the color of being caught. My daughter's carefully constructed composure shattered. A strangled sob escaped her lips and she swayed, gripping the back of her chair for support. "No," she whispered, her eyes darting wildly between me and Mark, as if searching for an escape route, a different version of this reality. He was just having a tantrum. He refused to come to the table. Mark said he just needed a minute to cool off. Her voice cracked on the last 2 words, the horrific unintentional pun hanging in the air between us. "Cool off?" I repeated, my own voice dangerously quiet. "It's 15 degrees out there, Amelia. He's in a t-shirt." I let that image sink in, painting a picture for the 2 comfortable, well-fed strangers at the table. I wanted them to feel the bite of that wind, to imagine the cold seeping into their own bones. I wanted them to understand the absolute cruelty of the act. Mark finally broke his paralysis. He lunged forward, not toward the door, not toward his stepson, but toward me. "You have no right," he snarled, his face contorted in a mask of righteous fury. He was trying to flip the narrative, to make me the villain, the intruder who had ruined their perfect holiday. "You barge into my house, you disrupt our dinner, you make these wild accusations." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood my ground, a granite wall of truth he couldn't get past. "Go look," I said, my voice cutting through his tirade like a razor. Go look at what your minute to cool off has done to him." The conviction in my tone stopped him cold. Doubt flickered in his eyes, warring with his anger. He glanced at his parents, who were staring at him with expressions of horrified confusion. He looked at Amelia, who was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands. His fortress of denial was crumbling. He had underestimated me. He had assumed I was just a lonely old man, easily dismissed. He never imagined I would actually show up. What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Would you confess, or would you double down on the lie? Amelia was the one who moved first. With a gut-wrenching cry, she pushed past her husband and ran for the door. She fumbled with the knob, her hands shaking too much to work the latch. Mark, his face a thunderous mask, finally seemed to grasp the severity of the situation. He shoved past me and wrenched the door open, the frigid night air flooding the warm foyer. We all followed, a grim procession, out onto the porch. The sudden blast of cold was a shock to everyone. Mark's mother gasped, pulling her thin cardigan tighter around herself. For a moment there was nothing but the sound of the wind and Amelia's frantic, panicked breathing. She scanned the lawn, the driveway, her eyes wide with terror. "Where is he?" she shrieked, her voice raw with a fear that was a decade too late. "Dad, where is he?" I didn't answer. I just walked calmly down the porch steps and toward my truck, still parked a block away but visible under the glow of the streetlights. They followed me, their expensive dress shoes slipping on the frosty grass. Mark grabbed my arm, his grip like steel. "What did you do? Where did you take him?" he demanded, his voice laced with an accusation that was almost laughable in its hypocrisy. I just shook his hand off without looking at him and kept walking. The closer we got to the truck, the more Amelia's panic escalated. She was running now, stumbling ahead of us, her cries echoing in the unnaturally quiet suburban street. She reached the truck first. She saw him through the passenger window, a small, still form wrapped in my heavy coat, his head resting against the glass. I heard her make a sound, a wounded animal noise of pure anguish. She clawed at the locked door, sobbing his name over and over. "Leo. Oh God, Leo, baby, I'm so sorry." I reached them, the keys cold and heavy in my hand. I unlocked the doors and she threw the passenger side open. She practically fell inside, gathering Leo's limp body into her arms. It was only then that she must have felt it. It wasn't the coldness of his skin, because he was finally starting to warm up from the truck's heater in my coat. It was something else. A dampness, a stickiness on his t-shirt, hidden beneath the heavy wool of my coat. Her sobbing stopped abruptly. She pulled back, her hands coming away from his chest. Under the dim interior light of the truck I saw it too, a dark crimson stain slowly spreading across the thin fabric of his shirt, right over his heart. Eleanor had a recurring nightmare. In it she was searching for Leo in a crowded, faceless place, but her feet were stuck in thick black mud. She'd call his name, but no sound would come out. She always woke up with the same silent scream trapped in her throat. Seeing the blood on Leo's shirt, I finally understood the sound of that scream. It was the sound of Amelia's gasp, a sharp, ragged intake of air that seemed to suck all the hope out of the world. The dark stain was a focal point, a black hole in the fabric of the night, pulling all of us into its orbit. All the drama in the house, the accusations and denials, it all evaporated, replaced by a single primal fear. How quickly a family dinner can turn into a roadside vigil. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. 1 second, we were a fractured family arguing over a turkey. The next, we were huddled around a child, united by a terror that transcended all our petty grievances. Amelia's hands hovered over the stain, trembling so violently she couldn't touch him. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice a hollow shell. "Dad, what is this?" Her eyes, wide and pleading, found mine. She wasn't seeing an accuser anymore. She was seeing her father, the one person who had always fixed things, from scraped knees to broken toys. But this was a break I didn't know how to fix. Mark, for the first time, looked truly afraid. Not angry, not defensive, but gutted by a fear that stripped away his arrogance. He pushed past Amelia, his movements clumsy, desperate. "Leo, buddy." He gently touched Leo's shoulder, trying to rouse him. "Leo, wake up." My grandson didn't stir. His breathing was shallow, his face unnervingly serene in the dim light. The blood. Where had it come from? I hadn't seen it when I wrapped him in my coat. My mind raced, replaying every second. Picking him up from the curb, his shivering body, the crumpled note. Nothing. No fall, no cry of pain. It made no sense. This silent, seeping wound was more terrifying than any scream. Mark's father was on his phone, his voice shaking as he spoke to a 911 operator. "My grandson. He's unconscious. Yes, there's blood." His wife was just standing on the curb, her hand over her mouth, rocking back and forth in a silent litany of shock. They were no longer characters in a domestic drama. They were just grandparents, terrified and useless. Is there a greater equalizer than the fear of losing a child? In that moment, we weren't in-laws or enemies. We were just 5 broken people on a frozen street, praying for sirens. I moved to the other side of the truck and opened the driver's side door, turning on the main interior light. The sudden brightness was harsh, clinical. It illuminated the scene with brutal clarity. The blood wasn't just a stain. It had soaked through the thin t-shirt. Mark, his face ashen, gently started to unbutton my coat from around Leo's small frame to get a better look. He had to see the source. We all did. As he peeled the heavy wool back, the t-shirt underneath was revealed. And we all saw it at the same time. There was no wound, no cut, no puncture, no sign of injury whatsoever. His skin was pale and cold to the touch, but it was unbroken. The blood wasn't coming from him. It was on him. It had soaked into his shirt from the inside of my coat. A collective, confused silence fell over us. I stared at the dark, smeared stain on the wool lining, a Rorschach blot of my own making. My mind, still reeling from the shock, struggled to connect the dots. The coat. I'd been wearing it all day. I'd put it on this morning when I went out to the workshop behind my house. The workshop. My hand started to shake, a delayed reaction to a memory from hours earlier. This morning, lost in a fog of grief and loneliness, I had decided to work on a small woodworking project for Leo, a little carved bird, something to keep my hands busy. The wood had been tough, my focus non-existent. The chisel had slipped. It had sliced deep into the palm of my left hand. I had wrapped it hastily with a rag from the shop, annoyed at my own clumsiness, and the bleeding had eventually stopped. I'd forgotten all about it, the deeper emotional pain of the day eclipsing the minor physical one. But the wound must have reopened when I'd balled my fists in anger on the porch. The warmth of my own body, trapped inside the heavy coat, had kept the blood from freezing, allowing it to seep slowly into the lining, the very lining that I had then wrapped around my grandson. Amelia looked from Leo's unmarked chest to my face, her own expression a maelstrom of confusion, relief, and dawning comprehension. She saw my left hand, still half tucked in my pocket, and the dark, dried bloodstains on my cuff. "Dad?" she breathed, her voice filled with a question she didn't know how to ask. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the night, growing closer. The flashing red and blue lights began to strobe against the identical beige houses, painting our tableau in frantic, urgent colors. The paramedics would be here any second. They would find a hypothermic but unwounded child. They would find a family in tatters. And they would find an old man with blood on his hands, a truth that was both literal and metaphorical. But just as the first ambulance rounded the corner, Leo's eyelids fluttered. His small chest rose with a deeper, shuddering breath. His eyes opened, not empty this time, but groggy and confused. He looked at his mother's tear-streaked face, at Mark's terrified one, and then his gaze drifted past them, finding me. His lips parted, and he whispered a single hoarse word, a name that changed everything. It wasn't Mom. It wasn't Grandpa. It was the name of the person he had been protecting. Eleanor. The name was a ghost in the cold night air, a fragile puff of vapor from Leo's pale lips. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a statement, a key. For a split second, nobody moved. The name of my dead wife, his beloved grandmother, spoken by a child who had just been pulled back from the brink, reset the entire universe. The paramedics were spilling out of the ambulance now, their movements efficient and loud, shattering the strange, sacred stillness that had fallen over the truck. They saw the scene, the terrified parents, the shivering child, the blood, and went into professional motion. But I was frozen, locked onto Leo's eyes. He was looking at me, only at me, and in his gaze I saw the whole, terrible story unfold. It wasn't about a turkey. It was never about a turkey. Eleanor had been a passionate advocate for animal rescue. Our home had been a revolving door of stray dogs and injured birds. She had taught Leo from the moment he could understand that animals were to be protected, cherished. A week before she died, she had taken him to a local farm sanctuary, a place where rescued farm animals lived out their lives. He had fallen in love with a big, goofy turkey named Tom. He'd fed it cranberries from his hand, mesmerized. It was his last, perfect memory of a day spent with her. He had made her a promise that he would always be a friend to the animals, just like her. That promise made by a little boy to his dying grandmother was the most sacred thing in his world. The crumpled note in my pocket suddenly felt like a holy relic. I will not eat the turkey. It wasn't a tantrum, it was a vigil. It was his desperate, silent attempt to honor her memory in a house where her name was probably never spoken. And Mark, in his infinite cruelty, had seen that quiet loyalty not as a virtue to be respected, but as a rebellion to be crushed. He hadn't just been punishing a picky eater. He had been punishing a child for loving a dead woman more than he feared a living man. He was trying to break the last, beautiful piece of Eleanor that still lived inside my grandson. The paramedics were checking Leo's vitals, wrapping him in thermal blankets. Amelia was trying to answer their questions, her voice a broken mess of sobs and stammers. Mark stood beside her, his face unreadable, his authority completely gone. He was just a man now, stripped of his power, exposed. The paramedics determined Leo was suffering from moderate hypothermia but was otherwise unharmed. The blood, they confirmed, was not his. As they prepared to take him to the hospital to be monitored, one of them looked at my hand. "Sir, you're bleeding. We should look at that." I glanced down at the gash on my palm, as if it belonged to someone else. The physical pain was a dull, distant throb. The real wound was inside, a chasm of grief and rage so vast I felt I could fall into it forever. Amelia rode in the ambulance with Leo. I told them I would follow in my truck. As I watched the flashing lights recede down the street, Mark and his parents were left standing with me on the curb. His mother was weeping quietly. His father just stared at the house, at the warm lights and the festive table, as if seeing it for the first time as the empty, heartless place it truly was. Mark finally turned to me. The fury was gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate look. "I didn't know," he said, the words pathetic and weak. "I didn't know it was about his grandmother. I thought he was just being difficult." I looked at him, at this man my daughter had chosen, and I felt nothing but a profound and weary pity. He didn't see people. He saw challenges to his authority. He didn't see love. He saw weakness. He was a hollow man. "It doesn't matter what you knew," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the frozen ground beneath my feet. "You saw a child, and you put him outside in the dark to freeze. The why of it doesn't change the what of it." I got into my truck without another word and followed the ambulance, leaving him and his perfect, ruined Thanksgiving behind. At the hospital, after Leo was settled in a warm room, sleeping soundly with an IV in his arm, Amelia and I sat in the sterile, buzzing quiet of the waiting area. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at her hands, twisting the wedding ring on her finger. "I let it happen, Dad," she whispered, the confession tearing out of her. I saw him getting stricter with Leo. I saw the look in his eyes, but I was so afraid of being alone again after Mom. I thought I was choosing a family. I thought I was choosing stability for Leo. She finally looked up, her eyes swimming in a grief that was now a decade old. But I chose a cage. We sat in that silence, letting her truth settle between us. I didn't offer empty comforts. I didn't tell her it would be okay. I just sat with her, a father again, sharing the weight of her terrible, heartbreaking choice. The real betrayal wasn't a plate of turkey. It was the slow, creeping compromise that allows cruelty to take root in a home. It's the fear that makes you silent when you should scream. True family isn't found in a perfect house or at a festive table. It's found in the quiet promises we keep to the ones we've lost, and in the ferocity with which we protect the ones who are still here. I learned that night that a home is not built with walls, but with unconditional love. And when that love is gone, you have to be willing to kick the door down to save the people trapped inside. I'm taking Leo home with me when he's discharged. He will not be going back to that house. Tell me in the comments, do you believe a person like Mark can ever truly change? Or is a cruelty like that a part of who they are? And what would you have said to Amelia in that hospital waiting room? Thank you for being a part of this story.